Welcome, everyone. The future sustainability of cities in Asia and the Pacific depends on the ability to innovate and integrate circular solutions for resource efficient and resilient socioeconomic development. The region has witnessed a landmark shift with more than half of its population now living in urban areas. This has significant social, environmental, and economic implications. As the proportion of people living in towns and cities increases, the use and disposal of resources and their related impacts also increase. One of the most critical challenges is the management of plastic waste, where purposeful interventions have the potential to support transformational circular economies and build the foundation for more sustainable communities. Plastic pollution is a significant issue in the Asia Pacific region. It is estimated that of the 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic produced globally over the past decades, only 9% has been recycled, while 79% has accumulated in landfills or the natural environment. If unchecked, the world's oceans will contain nearly 250 million metric tons of plastics by 2025. Countries with fast growing markets and underdeveloped waste management systems in Asia may be responsible for as much as 60% of global plastic waste leakage, causing a serious threat to biodiversity, ecosystems, human health, and well being. This needs to change. Transforming how we use and manage plastics is imperative, and we must help countries to shift to a circular economy that seeks to design products that create no waste or are reused and recycled. Focus on initiatives and actions to transition to a circular economy for plastics, digital tools, and frontier technologies, supporting circularity for plastics and best practice case studies from Asia Pacific. The discussions will exchange on how we can promote effective policies, partnerships, and institutions that will allow our cities in the Asia Pacific region to adopt wide circular economy interventions on the ground. To start with, I'll first invite Mr. Sanjay Kupar to give his address on transitioning to a circular economy for plastics in India. Can we please have his presentation?
Morning, everybody. This first slide is mainly how much garbage is being generated in India. It talks about that. Urban India generates right now around 55 million tons of municipal solid waste. That is around 0.15 million per day, and which is expected to reach 165 million tons by 2050. I think you should, okay. There's a unique integration of sustainable waste management with sustainable development goals. You see, 14 of the 17 SDGs are linked to waste management activities. These goals have been integrated in our country by way of increased income for the waste pickers, empowerment of informal sector, circular economy of the waste, innovation in technology, energy recovery, and economy of extended producers' responsibility. This is a brief chronology of our efforts to manage plastic waste in India. It started with banning plastic bags of certain micron in 1999. And with the launch of Swachh Bharat mission, that is Clean India mission, version 1 and version 2, during the last 8 years, India is in a position to ban maximum number of single-use plastics. This pie chart shows the waste characterization of municipal solid waste. Though lower than the global benchmark, the organic component of the waste has got maximum share, that is around 45%. India generates around 3 for single-use plastic, which has been banned in our country. But if you see at the slides, our figures are far lower than comparable economies across the world. Plastic recycling in India is almost 3 times the global average. India recycles 60% of its plastic waste. 70% is recycled by in the industry, 20% is recycled by unorganized sector, and 10% is recycled at household level. At 11 kgs per capita usage of plastic annually, our usage of plastic is also far lower against the global average of 28 kgs per capita. We have adopted a multidimensional and multi-sectoral approach in managing plastic, reducing the usage of single-use plastic and banning of single-use plastics. 14 central ministries and departments are collaborating in this effort. A typical linear economy adopts a take, make, and waste approach, while circular economy places emphasis on true recycling of materials, converting the waste resources back to its original form. For any circular economy to work, the key lies in having as many material recovery facilities as possible. Over the past 7-8 years, India has established, I think number of these centers established in India have grown almost fivefold. Government of India has adopted a comprehensive approach for technological solutions, policy initiatives and linkages followed by infrastructure development in this sector. These include upcycling plastic waste, recycle of multi-layered plastics into post-consumer goods, policy initiatives by prohibiting usage of single-use plastics, new guidelines for extended producer responsibility regime, and use of non-recyclable and combustible plastic as refuse-derived fuel in cement and other industries. Bringing out new policy for waste-to-energy plants in millions plus cities to utilize RDF as fuel with stringent pollution control measures. You all must have heard about 3R principle, that is you'll have to operate that. Okay, yeah. We all have heard about 3R principle, that is reduce, reuse, and recycle. India has added 3 more R's. Now it is 6R principle, that is additional 3R: recover, redesign, and remanufacture. In line with the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi to make India cities garbage free while adopting concept of circularity in waste management, we are banking upon new innovations, the strength of our startups, and providing tailor-made solutions to our entrepreneurs in waste management sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanjay, for sharing what India is doing to transition to a circular economy for plastics. I take note of the fact that we have to follow a sector approach and a 6R principle. Um, we may now start with the panel presentations, and after that we'll do a moderated panel discussion. I'll first ask Mr. Graham Alabaster, who's the Chief of UN Habitat Geneva Office, Switzerland, to share his thoughts on the theme of the discussion. Dr. Graham, over to you.
Thank you very much, Swati. It's a pleasure to be with you here in this meeting. As Swati says, I'm the head of Habitat's office in Geneva, but I'm a public health engineer by profession, and I've spent a large amount of my career working on waste management, both liquid and solid wastes. I think the first point I wanted to make, and we saw this already with the previous presenter, but you really do need to know the composition of your waste effectively in order for you to make clear decisions about where you want to invest in the waste management chain. At UN Habitat, we have this Waste-Wise Cities tool, which has been developed precisely to monitor the SDG for waste. And this can give you a first good idea based on city level data, exactly where the waste streams are going. So the first thing is having good data to enable you to make decisions about where you need to work. The second area of work, which is very important, of course, is the idea of looking at the whole chain of waste management. But there have been lots of ideas around restricting what goes into landfills. And, there are many countries who've successfully used policies to restrict certain waste going into landfill to very effectively reduce the use of such wastes. I think, though, for me, perhaps one of the most exciting areas that I've seen over the many years I've worked in the region is this idea of how do you stimulate the informal sector to recycle the most valuable parts of waste. And there's been work and looking at the value addition as you go up the chain. But, I think we now, and I'm talking about reasonably recently, have lots of tools available to make those small-scale recycling industries viable. So, we've got now all sorts of apps that community groups can use to trade in waste, that we have ideas of what the prices of the wastes are. We've got in the collection of this recycled wastes, we've got apps which will show small enterprises the best routes for them to go and collect waste, where wastes are. So we're really in a good situation where the viability of these small scale enterprises can be very good. And in many respects, just by the small scale enterprise focusing on taking effectively a low grade waste and turning it into an intermediate waste for processing, for further processing by formal recycling industries, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think, if we can look more closely, and what do we need to make those small enterprises exist? We first need the right policy environment. So we need, in many cases, we need local authorities who have the responsibility for waste management to find some way within their bylaws to provide an enabling environment for these small enterprises. That's one thing. The second thing is that we need to find catalytic startup capital to support these enterprises in many cases. We've seen the use of challenge funds, for example, which can be supported by various sources, including private sector. We've seen that work quite well for some areas. In Habitat, we've done a lot of work on using challenge funds to look at city-led climate interventions, for example. I think this is something that could be used more effectively. There are some places, but I think it could be used more effectively for the waste management chain. And I think also addressing the waste management chain. I mean, many years ago, I was asked by São Paulo municipality to look at their waste management setup, and their landfills were nearly full. And they were faced with a situation where the nearest disposal site was 70 kilometers away, and they were considering taking waste by train. And basically, they'd invested in the private sector. It was maximized landfill use. And of course, what they'd done is they really tried to centralize and mechanize the whole management of recycling, including of organic waste, which of course didn't work. It wasn't cost effective. So my advice to them was to go back to some of the small scale industries in Sao Paulo to reduce the volumes of waste that went to landfill, and so prolong the life of those landfills and reduce the operational costs for the municipality. So we need to think a bit innovatively. We don't necessarily need, in some big cities, to go high tech. We maybe need to step back and look more closely at the whole chain and how industries can be established. The last area I wanted to mention, Swati, is this idea about product development. And I know that, there's been lots of work done on biodegradable plastics. I think this is a very interesting area of work, and I think in some respects, there will be more opportunities than that. I was at a meeting the other day where I was working with some people who were looking at the application of quantum computers. And I'm not an expert in quantum computing, but I learned in this meeting that you can use these advanced computer techniques, which are still in their early stages, to design products more effectively. And where you need to design a new product, you can actually, rather than going through the traditional route of designing a biodegradable plastic, you can do this and simulate it using quantum computing. So I think there's a whole opportunity in the future that using some of these huge advances in technology that we have, that there is an opportunity to redesign some of the products, including plastics, to adapt it to be more easily recycled. And then just my final point, Swati, sorry, I won't go on too long. One of the things that I think is the biggest worry and should drive a lot of what we're doing is we're hearing increasingly of the evidence around microplastics and the threat to health. And, you know, I think this is a really worrying thing, that the fact that, you know, both in the oceans, in landfills, in animals and food that we eat, we're now finding increasing amounts of microplastics. And, you know, the only real way, of course, is to either find an alternative or to really stop that getting into our food chain. So these things are forgotten about. They're there. People think they're at trace levels and, you know, we can live with them, but I'm not so sure. I mean, if you look at most, you know, pollution requirements and health and safety, I remember when I was at school, you know, we used to happily get mercury and pour it between our hands. I mean, now, you know, if a thermometer breaks in the lab, they close the school down. So, I mean, you know, this idea of progressively refining limits, I think microplastics is something that we should take very seriously. So, only a little bit related, but this is a good evidence to drive local authorities, governments, and particularly environmental protection agencies to take plastic and waste recycling more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graham, for some very, very critical points. I do agree that composition is critical, good data is critical, and we really need to look and reflect into the chain of waste management, you know, and how can we minimize disposal? How do we be better at innovation and also focus on product design and more research and development around it? And clearly, you know, the importance of informal recycling sector and the need to redesign and rethink and innovate the systems. Thank you so much for your inputs. We now move to Kristen Hughes, who's the Director of Global Plastic Action Partnership from World Economic Forum, to share her thoughts on the theme of the panel. Kristen, over to you.
Hello, thank you so much, and thank you also for the invitation to speak today. I join you from Lisbon, where I'm also with Anjali, who I see is also on the panel and literally was just on another panel. So I'm so impressed to see the breadth of your expertise, Anjali. And again, thank you for the invitation to talk about this really important topic. It's really fascinating also to build on the comments of some of the other speakers who have come before me. Of course, most notably, I heard the first speaker really talking about the multi-sectoral approach, and we will not be able to address this issue if we all operate in silos and try to work alone. One of the ways that the Global Plastic Action Partnership, that final P, partnership, is very, very key to our success. And from the beginning, we have been working and collaborating across the board with a number of different partners, globally, regionally, nationally, and even locally, to try to connect the dots, share best practice, amplify efforts, and move to action, the A in the Global Plastic Action Partnership. So we are working with partners across the region. We initially launched in Indonesia, and a few weeks ago during the annual meeting 2022, we also launched a partnership with the state of Maharashtra in India, and talking to Anjali and the World Bank, potentially opportunities for other states like UP and potentially others. So hearing a lot of the synergies from some of the other speakers here, I think we can build on that and again, really drive home these collaborations. Other partners, and again, I have mentioned Anjali and the World Bank, but what's so fascinating, what the bank has done is taken some of the modeling and methodologies that we at GPAP in partnership with Systemic and Pew Charitable Trusts have created to develop a policy simulator tool, which will help decision makers in being able to really think about the right approach and the trade-offs in various policies and what that will look like after folks are starting to really think about what the global treaty on plastic pollution will start to look like. We have 2.5 years until that treaty is meant to be finalized, and as anybody working in this space knows, that time will fly by very, very quickly. Therefore, again, just can't emphasize enough the importance of our partnerships. We at the Global Plastic Action Partnership are also working with a few other organizations that I really wanted to call out, especially because of those who have invited us today. But the United Nations really bringing so many different actors to bear from all of your different departments. One that I would like to call out is UNEP, who are really coordinating and promoting the efforts behind the global commitment. Governments who can sign up for the global commitment, and companies as well, can also find a way then to build that out as they look to address plastic waste and pollution in advance of the global treaty. As I mentioned, Systemic and Pew Charitable Trust, two key partners of ours who created methodologies that can help governments to measure plastic waste flows, and then from there develop national action plans, again, much in line with what we're already seeing on the board in the conversations around the global treaty. Second Muse, who are identifying innovators in the region and are looking to help scale those innovations for even greater reach, greater impact. Innovators like TrashCon, who a wonderful young woman, Nevada, who brought this idea to life to really try to address the plastic waste that she saw in her own community, take that waste and develop tools that could be utilized, including schools, tables, desks in the community for children who at that time were not yet going to school. And now she's also looking to scale her innovations across the region. And financial teams like Circulate Capital and the Circulate Initiative, both who are here in Lisbon as well, and who are making investments in this space to unlock opportunities and hopefully set an example to bring in other investors to really help us reach scale. So I would really just go back to that very first intervention and build on that as we continue over the next 2.5 years. And of course, the rest of this afternoon's session, really diving into the importance of partnerships, multi-stakeholder approaches, and the multi-sectoral approach to helping us address plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for highlighting the importance of partnerships, innovation. And I do agree that for the Plastic Global Treaty, the time to act is now, and we all need to sort of act together in sync with each other. Thank you so much for your views. We now come back to Taylor Madeline, who's the Director Circularity Assessment Protocol in University of Georgia, USC. Taylor, over to you. Can we have a presentation, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will be speaking from the academic side of things for this part of the presentation, but I wear a couple different hats. So for this one, as Swati said, I'm based at the University of Georgia. I work in what we call the Circularity Informatics Lab, and I lead our work on the Circularity Assessment Protocol. So very, very pertinent for circular economy conversations. So at the Circularity Informatics Lab, we've developed this protocol that's essentially aims at getting a holistic snapshot of a city's circularity related to a given product. And typically what we look at is single-use plastics, which has been a, not surprisingly, a very hot topic the last several years. We've run this protocol to date in nearly 30 different cities across 10 different countries. Different components, and there's sort of 7 spokes that you can see up here on the figure. We look at where products are coming from, how they're actually entering a city or a community, where their parent companies are, their manufacturers, through to what they're actually made of, how they're manufactured, community components, so looking at perceptions of plastic waste, perceptions of the use of plastic and waste management in a given community, use and reuse, recycling, you know, what type of products are actually being reused or recycled, what type of waste collection and management systems exist there, and to what extent they're being used for different waste streams. And then finally, leakage, what ends up escaping the system and entering the environment, and how do we ultimately close that loop to prevent it from entering the environment in the first place. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we've had the pleasure of working in nearly 20 different cities in the Asia Pacific region. We have implemented this globally, but we have done a lot of work in this region in particular. One of the silver linings of COVID is that we actually were able to develop local implementation partners in all of these cities to work through. So as our team was unable to travel, we were able to sort of create a training protocol whereby we could have local partners that really championed this work and did the field work and implemented the reports locally. So this is just a snapshot of some of the cities and some of the amazing partners that we've worked with in those different places. And then the sort of dashed circles through some work that we did with National Geographic a couple of years ago. We were able to work in 11 different cities across India and Bangladesh and sort of did a cap light, if you will, in those places as part of a Ganges expedition that we did. Next slide, please. And I'll talk a bit more about this in the Q&A section, but just sort of a snapshot of some of the data that we've collected. The CAP is a combination of sort of on the ground data collection that's quantitative, as well as some qualitative data, and also desktop research, literature review, and some sort of software data collection. But a couple of the findings just in some of the cities that we've worked in, specifically in Asia Pacific, that I wanted to call out that will be relevant to some of the things that we're going to discuss later, and also relevant to what the other panelists have mentioned, is that we find that among convenience products, multi-layer plastic and plastic film is really the highest abundance of a product that we're seeing. And this links back to what we were talking about with the informal sector, because these are often products of low value that are difficult to capture, difficult to contain within a waste system, and don't necessarily have an end market for recycling. So an interesting product to look at in terms of the role that it plays in the full waste stream. And then also looking at waste leakage, because we've had the opportunity of doing this in several different regions around the world. You can see here on this graph that Southeast Asia actually has quite a low amount of waste leakage or litter that we see on the ground compared to some other places around the world. And most often those items that actually do end up getting littered are those low value, lightweight items that you'll see here, such as food wrappers, tobacco packaging especially. So one of the interesting things with the leakage of tobacco products is that there also could be some interesting overlaps with things like health and communications. So what we're seeing is that there are, as we'll discuss later, tremendous opportunities, shared challenges, but also some great silver linings that we're seeing. And as was mentioned by Kristen and others, there are some great pilots and great partnerships that are happening in this region. So it's an exciting time to be looking at circular economy, and it's an exciting time to be working in Asia Pacific. And we're very honored to be part of the large global group of people that are working on this. And I'll pass it back to Swati.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing some very important points and sharing the work that has been done as a part of the Circularity Assessment Protocol. Clearly, we really need to exchange data more, considering a lot of baseline assessments that have happened in the Asia Pacific region. So there's a huge scope of collective knowledge that has to come together. And clearly, baselines are critical for strengthening evidence-based planning in solid waste and plastic waste management. We now move on to the next speaker, who's Martin Tickner, the Chief Advisor, Circular Solutions from Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Martin will have a presentation. Over to you, Martin.
Very good. Thanks, Swati. So I would say in this sphere of collaboration that we have here, just while I share my screen, in this sphere of collaboration, we're really representing, as the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, the private sector engagement. And I think listening to Kristen's comments in particular, I would say that the summary of my presentation here, which is to give you a very quick overview of the Alliance, the work that we do, 2 or 3 example projects out of a suite of more than 50 plus projects. But the one takeaway from that would really be we're action oriented. So when we talk about the Global Plastic Action Plan, I would like to think that we're one of the partners which is definitely looking to deploy capital and to be able to work on the technical solutions, the business model solutions, the economic solutions, and bring our contribution in that direction. So a few words about the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, if I may, to start with. So you see here pretty well most of the membership. There are actually a few which are missing off this slide, but we're now engaged with about 85 different organizations. Very significant representation across the value chain, across the plastics value chain. So you see through brands, chemical companies, converters, waste management companies, but also with a set of strategic allies, organizations that have a very similar agenda to our own, and a set of supporters as well. And we would describe ourselves as convening a global network to translate commitment into action, because I have to fully agree with everything that Kristen said, that this is all about collaboration, unprecedented partnerships, and it's about everybody understanding where their strengths are, where their particular areas of impact can be. And again, we would describe our area of impact mostly is in terms of being, we call it a do tank. So this is focused on action. So where we are today is we have more than 50 projects. Our projects range anywhere between $200,000 for a project through to 20 million plus. We have projects in about 30 different countries. And I think this is what really differentiates the Alliance from many organizations. We're funded to do projects, so deeply funded. We're a relatively new organization, I would say, really only fully established in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, so moving at a very fast pace, and I would like to say a lot more to come. And you see the type of projects just trapped here. Small scale social enterprise projects are typically the sorts of things that we did initially. And a little bit, as we heard from Dr. Graham and from others, trying to start the ball rolling. And there's the famous phrase that says, from small acorns do mighty oaks grow. So you start little things and you begin to see those little things growing into larger things. And already within our 2 to 3 years, we're seeing a number of those projects now moving into replication and scaling. We also do a lot of work in terms of finding solution pathways, so demonstration and de-risking of new technology, new business models, and then increasingly looking to engage in what we call a flagship program, which would typically be a significant geography, a large-scale program, perhaps addressing an entire country or a significant part of a country, and actually working with countries where there are NPAPs or under the GPAP, but countries where there is clearly a very strong commitment already made by the government. And the little chart at the bottom just captures in a kind of 2x2 matrix. At the bottom, we work on solutions which bring the solution pathways for the future, but not necessarily quick impact. And then as we go up the left-hand axis, looking at impact. And then across the bottom, we really have 2 major parts to our agenda. One is collection and basic recycling in those countries that don't have adequate basic waste management, so really don't have collection. And that's always municipal solid waste. So it's not just plastic waste in isolation, it's lack of basic facilities to be able to provide a community service. And on the right-hand side, we work on circular solutions. That tends to be a bit more of the Western orientation, so very much the projects that we're doing in Europe and North America. And I'll just take a couple of examples with projects that we do, showing, I think, the range of activity that we have in Asia. So I'm not covering any European, North American, South American, or African projects here, nor our activities in China and Japan. But this first one, it's very appropriate to pick an example with UN Habitat for obvious reasons, but this is a partnership that we've had with UN Habitat. Actually, I've been working with Swati in this in its early stage of development. It's very much about capacity building. So enabling UN Habitat to engage with municipalities, to be able to assess the local solid waste management status, defining the interventions which are required, mapping the waste flows that go with that, really then developing solutions, multi-stakeholder discussions leading to those, and developing an action plan, which might be at a full city level, it might be at a district within a city, but to develop an action plan, which is then something that we can consider investing in. And we do believe that data is a very strong driver behind activities, so the Alliance captures the results of all these types of activities in the global waste management database that we operate. That's one example. Another example in India, really exciting project. There's about $4.5 million. And this is working with an organization called Recity, which are using or focused on 3 different aspects, I would say. So the first one is they're really creating basic waste management infrastructure, which they develop, build, start up, operate for a period of time, and then hand over to the municipality for the continued operation. So we're supporting providing a service of developing basic waste management infrastructure for cities to operate. Very focused on behavior change. So you see here the scope of the initial project we have with Recity, behavior change across 1 million people, producing about 15,000 tons a year of quality plastic recyclates, collecting incremental collection of about 15,000 tons. But very exciting the way they're using technology to provide traceability, to also inform the India EPR systems. And I think what I particularly like here is also the approach to recognizing the importance of integrating the informal and the formal waste sectors. We could perhaps talk about this more later, but really important that informal waste sectors very much supporting the existing recycling activities wherever there is value. But they only collect the plastic that has value, and the plastic that doesn't have value remains behind. And we need to be able to find the ways to be able to collect plastic waste holistically, not just the plastic waste that has value. And the next phase of this, which we're already discussing, is targeting a 10 times replication. So that'll be 150,000 tons, 10 million people, and creating improved livelihoods for 30,000 workers. So exciting next phase. And the last example, then I'll stop, Swati. But this is typically how the Alliance wants to work, that we start with relatively small scale activities in order to be able to prove a model. And then having seen something which works, or at least learned the lessons from it, we then look at how can we scale that activity, how can we replicate it, and how can we attract additional capital in order to be able to support it. So many of you are probably familiar with the original Project STOP program, in which Systemic and Borealis were the original founders. The Alliance came in the third of the sequence of STOP projects, so we call that Project STOP in Jembrana in Bali. And you see the magnitude of that project here, 150,000 population being addressed, 20,000 tons a year of MSW being dealt with, 3,000 tons of plastic waste. So you put 3,000 tons in the context of 11 million tons, it's very much a small acorn. But what we're now progressing, I'm very proud to be able to move forward, is a replication of the scale of 40 times the original program. So you see in our Bersih Indonesia project, as we call it, addressing 3 regencies. Malang is up and running. We're now working on the Magelang and Sukabumi regencies. But the final program here, you see, will be tackling something at the order of 800,000 tons, so close to 1 million tons a year municipal solid waste, 140,000 tons a year of plastic waste, additional collection, additional recycling, 4,500 employees, and an $80 million project. So I hope that kind of illustrates for you the type of actions that the Alliance is pursuing. I can only cover 3 projects here out of our current program of 50, but a lot more to come. And with that, Swati, I hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Martin, for sharing a wide range of interventions and projects that you're executing in the Asia-Pacific region. What we take back is that clearly the time of pilots is over, and what you rightly mentioned, that we really need to upscale interventions now at a large scale and ensure that these best practices get replicated. Moving on to the next speaker, we have Dr. Anjali Acharya, who's the Senior Environmental Specialist from World Bank, Singapore. Anjali, over to you.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, hold on. Let me just put on my PowerPoint presentation. Again, just wanted to check that you can see it.
Yes, Anjali, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Swati, and I'm very pleased as an Indian also to be part of this panel to reflect on the work that the World Bank has been doing across the Asia and Pacific. And of course, for our purposes, we have South Asia and East Asia, but collectively look at Asia. As Kristen said, I'm live from Lisbon, where we have just come out of a session on ocean plastic. And this really shows the interconnections between the World Urban Forum and the UN Oceans Conference here, because of the issue of marine plastics and circular economy. So what we clearly know is that there is a regional dimension to marine plastics, and that Asia is indeed a hotspot. This map that everybody knows, and people may dispute the exact numbers, but clearly you can see that a lot of the mismanaged plastic waste is focused around the projections going forward. You also see that over the next so many decades into 2030 and 2050, the biggest increases are going to be in South Asia and the East Asia Pacific region. Given that, we really need to look at sort of the transboundary nature of marine plastic debris and also focus very much on upstream before we go to midstream and then downstream. The transboundary nature is evidenced by the shared river systems and coastlines, which act as a conduit for plastic waste. Have regional waste trade, where you can see that one country's policies results in a diversion of plastic waste to other countries in Southeast Asia. And then, of course, you also have regional markets for plastics, where you have different private sector companies that are not looking at this as this is the market for Cambodia or this is the market for Singapore. They are looking more comprehensively at regional markets. So given this, let me give you a flavor of the kinds of engagements that we're working across this region, the Asian. So first, what we're doing is really building the analytical base through different kinds of analytical tools, digital tools. One of the areas we've started out with is really very much on the metrics, looking at baseline analytics for rivers and coastlines. This is some work in Indonesia and Thailand. We have riverine plastic discharges that are being done in Nepal and Pakistan. We've also looked at innovative tools such as flying drones over sections of rivers in Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, etc., where through a combination of high-resolution imagery and artificial intelligence, we're able to discern at least an approximate amount of the types of plastic and the volume of plastic that can be found in some of these locations, and then in a way that helps to inform policies. One of the things that previous speakers have said is the importance of bringing in the private sector, and to get a better understanding of this, we've done studies, market studies in 4 countries in the region, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And working with our sister organization, the International Finance Corporation, we have really looked at what are the barriers to unlock private sector financing. Is it the lack of off-takers? Is it the lack of guarantee of a market, etc.? So how can governments work to really strengthen the enabling environment to be able to bring in and invite private sector to come in? And then, of course, there's a whole suite of technical studies that we've done, whether it's to include gender in the plastics context, whether it's looking at technology solutions or the riverine technologies. Swati, I see somebody else is unmuted. Perhaps they can be muted.
Yeah,
the second
sure.
block of activities has been on informing and influencing national policies and action. So this is along the lines of the frameworks that is mentioned in the title of this session. So in Malaysia and Bangladesh, for example, we're supporting the Plastics Sustainability Roadmap as well as a multi-sectoral action plan for sustainable plastic management. So really focusing in on what should be done when, and really in this particular field, the focus on phasing out single-use plastics is an important one that has come up in several of the countries. So in Philippines, the Pacific Islands, and Maldives, we're working closely with the government on trying to define a roadmap for phasing out single-use plastics. Similarly, in Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, we have been really looking at developing different kinds of action plans, informing the policy options that they're looking at. Furthermore, in Indonesia, Vietnam, China, etc., we're doing further studies, which really builds on, the World Economic Forum's National Plastic Action Partnership that Kristen is representing. And then finally, looking at assessments of municipal solid waste management plans in different regions to really inform the more midstream policies. Again, the whole gamut of policies ranges from, baseline assessments to a study on impact of COVID-19 on plastic waste management. And then at the regional level, we're really looking we have developed already with the ASEAN member states a regional action plan to combat marine plastic debris. We understand there is a similar effort in South Asia, where I think the UN had put together a similar kind of action plan. And this action plan is really important because it was well consulted with all the 10 ASEAN member states, and these 14 regional actions represent their collective asks on how they want to address this issue. Creating opportunities for investments. This is again an area that we're now moving into. We have understood, we have a strong analytical and evidence base. We now have informed policies, and now being a financier as well, we are working in all these countries to really look for opportunities to inform sectoral lending, whether this is plastic waste reduction projects like in China, or solid waste management projects in Cambodia and Indonesia, but also looking beyond that into projects in tourism, projects in fisheries, projects in coastal resilience, etc. At the regional level, 2 years ago, South Asia launched a regional program, which was developed with SACEP, a $50 million regional project, which brought in also co-financing from Parley for the Oceans. And this project is really to work at a regional level to really bring together the different regional policies. Similarly, last week, the World Bank approved a new $20 million regional grant for the ASEAN, and this time to really focus on regional policies across these 10 ASEAN countries, but also create platforms, regional platforms for innovation and investment. This was really the strong ask from the member states to say, we have innovations in different countries, how do we access it? We know there's availability of financing, how can we be on an even playing scale to be able to access that information? Now, at this moment in time, and speaking from Lisbon, there is this huge excitement and this ramping up of ambition and action towards the global legally binding instrument that everyone is talking about. And here collectively, whether we're in the city space or the national space or the rural space, to see how we can collectively work together on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anjali, for some very valuable inputs and also highlighting the importance of policies and collective learnings from policies across the Asia-Pacific region. Without wasting any time, I think let's move to the panel discussion. And I would first ask Graham to answer a few questions. Dr. Graham, to you, I mean, what tools or resources do youth and tomorrow's leaders need access to in order to be successful in taking actions that support circularity and towards a better future? And how can we support?
Okay, well, I mean, I think we've heard from our colleagues at the World Bank, from many others, that there's plenty of money around. The problem is it's just going to the wrong places. We know that many of the, there's two sources of finance. Of course, we get the international financing organizations, but a lot of that money comes into national governments and it doesn't filter down necessarily to the cities where they need the resources to manage their waste. So that's a very important, I mean, I know some of the regional development banks have sub-sovereign financing windows, but there needs to be a clear focus on lending at the lower level. Of course, there needs to be national government guarantees in most cases, but to really strengthen the waste management sector at city level. Now, that needs lots of efforts because, of course, it's the government, the local government, who have to regulate in many cases. And even if, of course, the solid waste management sector and management is let out to private sector organisations, it has to be managed in a proper and effective way. So I think the first thing is the resources, and opening the way for financial resources. The second thing is to look at local level administration and governance systems, because in many cases, particularly cities and local authorities, they have at their disposal the ability to make bylaws and local legislation, which can greatly influence how waste management is effective. That can be from the environmental standards point of view, and we've seen that. Dear colleague from India has talked about, the ban on plastic waste. This can also be done at a city level. It doesn't necessarily have to be national legislation. It can be something done at local level. So we've got that side of things, but we've also got this way to provide this enabling environment for the small scale enterprises to move forward. So, okay, that's one side of it. But I mean, there also has investment and infrastructure always compared to water and sanitation and other areas. So, there has to be resources, and this is a national government responsibility to make sure that more resources are available internally. if systems are managed well and there's the proper fees in place for services, there's no reason why costs can't be recovered at the local level. It's just making sure that systems are in place to do that. I think, I know, and I know it's the case in this region and in many others, that there is huge capacity amongst communities and organisations to organise themselves, to set up these enterprises. And as I mentioned in my first intervention, if we can find a way of seed capital for these organisations, it's very good. And I mean, I think the other thing about the replication is, I mean, this has to be a central government responsibility. And we've seen, even on quite a large scale, investments in projects. But, ultimately, if you want replication, it has to be part of the furniture in national government policy. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graham. My next question is for Taylor. Taylor, what are some of the highlights of circularity that you've seen in Asia Pacific? I know you highlighted some in your presentation, but what are some of the highlights and some of the most common challenges and opportunities that you see in Asia Pacific cities where you've conducted the circularity assessment protocol? Over to you.
Thank you, Swati. It's a fantastic question, and as I said, I think that it's an exciting time to be working in the circular economy space, and it's an especially exciting time to be working on that topic in Asia Pacific. From the circularity assessment protocol side of things, I think that one of the things that gives me great hope is just seeing the data be used. I mean, that is always the highest value of all of the work that we do, is that the data gets to the right people in the right ways so that they can make the right decisions that work in their own context. And our work largely sets a baseline at a city level. And so it's, as Graham was saying, it's a lot of working with those local municipalities that have some level of flexibility, some malleability in what they do. And so it's been exciting to see the CAP actually be integrated into strategic plans, into policies, into outreach campaigns. And then on the flip side, it's been really exciting, even just sitting on this panel and realizing that we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of these partners, and also with the UN Environment Program on the upcoming global treaty, and just helping to think through what metrics for circular economy at different scales look like, and how do we measure success over time. So with the sort of academic hat on, I've been really excited about the work that we're doing, and just seeing it be used more and more. In terms of work that's actually being done on the ground, there are three things that I think are really particularly exciting in this region. One of them is the tremendous value of the informal waste sector, and it really can't be sort of underestimated. And I think that that can be attributed to a lot of the data that I was showing earlier in terms of sort of lower amounts of litter. I think it's come up in several of the presentations today that a lot of the material that is escaping that waste stream is sort of low value items that we just haven't figured out a way to completely close the circle on. And so I think that there are some really exciting pilots going on in terms of kind of bringing together the informal waste sector and the formal waste sector. And also there seems to be a tremendous amount of interest in more effectively integrating those informal waste sectors into conversations that are happening right now around changes that are happening at the local level. So I think that's something that is quite unique to the region, and something that I think has tremendous value. The second is opportunities for extended producer responsibility. One of the things that we're seeing in our data is that there actually are a tremendous amount of manufacturers and parent companies that are among the top convenience items that are also located fairly close to some of these cities that really want to take steps towards extended producer responsibility. And we've seen, at the national level, countries like India and others that have taken real steps towards putting guidelines and frameworks around that. But working at the city level, I think there are some really exciting opportunities and interest for pilots to really make that work for some of the top convenience items that we're seeing, especially for problematic items like multi-layer films and otherwise. And then just lastly, one of the things that I find really, really heartening is, as we've been talking about, just the tremendous opportunity for technical solutions in these places, and a really fired up, for lack of a better phrase, younger generation that can bring things like apps and exciting new technologies to the waste sector. And I think that there will be a lot of things happening in that space in the next couple of years, and I think it's a space to watch. And I think that there are some cities in the Asia Pacific region that I think will be tremendous leaders for that, and so that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I have my next question for Martin. Martin, what are some of the new and transformative approaches that can be taken to foster circular economy for plastics in the Asia Pacific region, considering there are a lot of projects that Alliance to End Plastic Waste is funding? Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Swati. So the first comment I would make is maybe reacting a bit to the transformative approach and the assumption that that means radical new technology, it means new innovation. I think we need to keep our feet on the ground a little bit and recognize that the starting point for a circular economy is waste collection. The problem in terms of leakage into the marine environment is waste collection. So I think we need entrepreneurism for sure, but there are no silver bullets here. It's going to be a journey, so it will take time, and I think most important is that we really start on it. And as we heard before, is the time for small-scale pilots is perhaps past us, and we really need to be working on larger scale projects and how can we bring action on the ground in a very rapid way. That said, the vision is circularity. So yes, waste collection is the starting point for circularity, or at least part of it, if we focus on the recycling element of the circular economy. But there are things that we can already adopt, and I think things that we can learn from other regions and make sure they are brought rapidly into the countries which are more the starting point on the journey. So we heard a bit about mobilizing capital for sure. That's absolutely key, and getting ready to scale, looking at replicable models, investable models, looking at how we can mobilize that capital to help. I think private sector, and particularly when we look at the brand owners and some of these companies we talked about a moment ago, they recognize their responsibility. They are keen to support EPR, other financial interventions, but also there's a lot that can be done in terms of, firstly, adopt circular business model as a vision. So you can't get there overnight. Like all visions, it's something that guides your activity, your actions. You won't get there immediately. But if you're thinking about it, you're thinking about different ways of doing business, different ways of supplying consumers. I think that can really work. And very much within the reach, I heard the word multi-layer films or multi-material films, MLPs, a few minutes ago. There are design guidelines. Those design guidelines are being adopted very, very rapidly in some regions, in Europe in particular. And I think we will see that by 2026, that the mix of films and materials that waste management companies have to deal with will be simplified. And the sooner that we can drive the adoption of those design guidelines into other regions, driving for better quality of recyclers, easier recycling, and really seeding that the industry is able to develop more quickly than perhaps it has done in the regions that haven't got those design guidelines. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do here. And lastly, I heard the words a few moments ago, advanced technologies, for sure. There are some very exciting advanced technologies that the Alliance is working on. I think sorting in particular, to deal with municipal solid waste, with household waste, the key is really in the way in which we sort, which is either segregated collection or it's advanced detection and sorting technologies. And to begin to think about those as infrastructure is developed and to design so that we have the right technologies in place from the outset, I think is very powerful. So long answer to your question, Swati, but I hope that got there.
Thanks, Martin. And just to follow up to your answer, you mentioned using the data generated by UN Habitat's capacity development activities into a global database that the Alliance operates. Can you briefly tell us more about it?
Yes, so yeah, we believe very much, and as I said before, we believe in the power of data and the power of transparency. I think transparency on performance and where the bigger issues are, where the improvements are, is really, really important. We also heard that from the World Bank a moment ago. So the Alliance over the last 2 years or so has been developing a global database, which gives us the ability to be able to capture granular data, so not just at country level, but down to regions, cities, districts within cities. We capture various different elements of plastic waste data, from put on market to collected to recycled to leaked. We also capture the infrastructure which is existing in a region, so dump sites, landfill sites, waste to energy, chemical recycling, mechanical recycling facilities, etc., and also project activities. So we've developed this foundation. So the database is existing. Now what we're looking to do is to build a collective ownership of this, really with a vision of saying that there should be one source of data. It would be far more efficient if we're all contributing to a single set of data that people can trust and that people can see this is something which really helps to guide their activity.
All right. Thank you so much, Martin. I now have an audience response, and I'll ask my colleague now, who's a waste management specialist with UN Habitat, a brief question. Now, can you please come to the stage? Yeah. So now, how the Habitat headquarter has been looking after and managing the Waste Wise Cities program, and also has developed the Waste Wise Cities tool based on an SDG indicator 11.6.1. So how the WAP tool developed by UN Habitat has supported and strengthened data in Asia Pacific, and why you think cities need to use it? Over to you.
Thank you, Swati, and thank you very much for having me here. It's a very interesting session, and thank you very much for sharing. To share that initiative of the Waste by Cities under the UN Habitat. So basically, we are custodian agency for SDG indicator 11.6.1, which is measuring a percentage of municipal solid waste collected and managed in control facilities out of total municipal solid waste generated in a city. Then basically this is measuring the proportion of municipal solid waste managed in control facilities, properly managed in the city. And then we basically launched this the tool. Waste by Cities tool is a monitoring tool for this SDG 11.6.1, and then we try to also kind of bring the standardization in measuring the waste in the cities, because before, for example, when you go to the city and then like ask the city manager like how much of the waste is generated in the city, and then like probably the city manager bring the paper from here and here and here, and which is basically the record of the landfill site, and then summing up, and then this is the amount to generate in the city, but it's not, because like so much of the waste is uncollected. So it's like the waste data has been really dodgy for the past years. So we would like to kind of introduce a standardized methodology to really monitor the waste generation based on the primary data collection from 90 households, and for the mega cities 50 households for seven days, so that you really can see that the good trustworthy enough data for the waste generation especially. So the waste by cities to also measure the quantified how much of the waste received by recovery facilities. We set up a whole questionnaire to be distributed to the recovery facilities that is receiving the municipal solid waste, and we also measure the percentage of the informality in the supply chain. And through this, you basically can get in touch with all these like stakeholders and recyclers in the city. And this facilitates the partnership between the municipality and the recovery chain, and then also including the informal waste sectors. So basically the whole sector, so basically this tool, as you can see some of the presentation that can really provide how much of the waste is generated from household and non-household sources, and where it's going with recovery facilities and the disposal facilities, and how much uncollected. So this is, and then also all these like really basic essential data that you really need for the master planning of the solid waste management. Also all this like sophisticated modeling of the marine litters that is all going around at the moment in the UN Ocean Conference, and then all these stages needs proper data on the ground. And then sometimes those drug modeling and then everything sometimes uses like some dodgy data that was reported in 2000 or like 1995 or something like that. So it's like we would like to kind of bring some like a little bit of a standardization in there. And we did this survey. We launched this Waste by Cities tool in 2021. And in last year, we applied more than 50 cities globally. And then we also include that into a big model developed by the University of Leeds, and then try to do some like global estimation for the SDG 11.6.1. And in the regional trend, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia, we found out about like 70 to 85% of the waste collected in regionally, like globally, are basically in the Asia region, South Asia and the Southeast Asia region. And then this also really changes the big city to the small towns. The small towns tend to have a lower waste collection rate. So it's like you actually can see that in India, especially, that we have like lots of coastal secondary cities that probably going around like a waste collection rate, probably 60 to 70%, or like 50 to 60% also. And then in Cambodia, for example, if we go into the very small town, that the waste collection rate is about like 50%. So it's almost kind of similar to the African level. So that these are the leakage, definitely leakage sources of the uncollected waste. So those like secondary towns actually needs lots of investments in the infrastructure to collect the waste, such as like transfer stations and material recovery facilities. And then also, if you look at the percentage of managed and controlled facilities in those regions, is about ranges between from 20 to 60%. So it's like, especially in South Asia, the waste collected is about 72%, but managed and controlled facility is 24%. Meaning, so many countries, so many cities in South Asia are relying on the open dump sites. So basically the leakage is also like the uncollected waste. However, the investment policy interventions are needed, especially in Asian context, is enforcement of environmental standards and a governance system to really like make the waste management facilities operators to comply with all these standards. Many of them are not controlled facilities, so it's like these are the area that you have to really go through. And then also in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, we've witnessed that lots of appetites for the waste energy plants, because they don't have land, and an open dump site is there's no land, and we have to really find out the solution. And then like so many countries are coming into the waste to energy. However, those appetite is sometimes existing without proper feasibility study. So sometimes like so many like cities like we witnessed in Vietnam, high appetite in waste to energy. However, that is sometimes a very vulnerable situation. So that's a kind of wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much now for all the inputs. I now move to Kristen for a few questions. Kristen, as we work towards a binding global treaty on plastic pollution, what national level initiatives are necessary to effectively deliver a circular economy for plastics? Are there any examples that you see through your work and the GPAP networks? And what incentives can policymakers offer to increase circular economy transition for plastics? Over to you, Kristen.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that question. Part of what we've been working on as the Global Plastic Action Partnership is a suite of tools that we're looking to deliver with our partners on the ground that really help governments at the national level. And interestingly enough, we're now also rolling these out to support at the subnational, the state level, for example, in Maharashtra and India, as well as Mexico City, obviously in Mexico. And so I think there are a number of different ways that the governments can then address plastic pollution at that national level. And in particular, what this tool does is it helps governments to model and understand the plastic waste flows and the kind of pollution that exists, and then also think about the steps needed to take in order to address those through national action plans. And again, these are very critical, as we've already seen them in conversations and in discussions as a part of the global treaty. As Anjali mentioned, there are other ways that governments can address and at least do some of this modeling and assessment through drone technology or other AI and innovations in that model and monitor rivers. and the rubbish that we're seeing there. So I think there are a lot of different ways that we can actually gather data. This supports Martin's approach with the Alliance End Plastic Waste and the PRISM, how they're trying to collect that data. And all of this and all of us are really trying to work together to support governments as they're aiming to address this important issue. And of course, none of this would be possible also if we don't include the informal sector, both in the conversations as we lead up to the final conclusion of the delivery of this treaty in the next 2.5 years, but generally in trying to ensure that we continue to move towards a more circular economy for plastics. They are an absolute critical part of this, and we need to find a way to not only recognize, but potentially bring them more formally. Some of the conversations I've had, let's say, with some of the informal sector workers in Indonesia and in Ecuador, very much looking to have social security numbers and bank accounts and access to capital as well as credit. So I think there are a number of different ways governments can engage to support the transition to circular economy, both at that very local level, supporting people like informal sector, but also through the mechanisms of policy frameworks and the various regulatory approaches that they're considering when it comes to capital and financing. And again, Martin was talking about the efforts of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Well, they need to be able to go someplace and make those investments without a lot of hurdles, without big taxes. So how can we actually find ways to unlock financing and create incentives in innovative ways that then bring that capital to life, specifically around things in the downstream efforts, in collection, sorting and recycling, but equally in upstream opportunities and really finding those innovative solutions that will help us to remove some of the unnecessary plastics, therefore reducing our need for some of it, and then also various business model approaches, so reuse and refill models in various cities where that is actually possible, and through those efforts can bring consumers along on the journey to help us reduce plastic pollution. So whilst I think all of us have a role to play, government through their policy interventions, their attraction to finance, their incentives for that investment, as well as incentives for innovations, numerous steps that governments can take. And again, we're looking to work with the Alliance, Ocean Conservancy, World Bank and others, and as well as UN Habitat and your other agency partners across the UN to really help governments understand both these plastic waste flows analyses, but also how we can help them deliver these policy frameworks and national action plans.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for rounding that up. I now move to Anjali. Anjali, what do you see as the role of the public and private sector in moving towards enhanced plastic circularity and a circular economy? And what are some ways to enable better collaboration?
Thank you, Swati. So one of the things I just wanted to back up a bit and sort of mention that it is really important to recognize that plastics came out as a miracle innovation some 60 years ago. And so now it will be innovation that will take us to the next phase where we redefine our relationship with plastics. Similar to some of the earlier speakers, but also slightly different, one of the things that we have been putting a lot of focus on is working upstream. So upstream as much as possible, because once you start talking about landfills and all the way downstream, it's too late. So as much as can be done upstream to really remove unnecessary plastics, look at alternatives, look at different ways of use of these plastics. And in this regard, I think there are 4 areas that will really require public and private sector collaboration, because on one side there is the finance, the technology, and the innovation, and how do we bring this together. So one is new business models. Kristen has already talked about that, product design for longer use, for repairability, lots of examples of reuse refill model, trying to find how to eliminate the use of disposables in the food industry, for example, eliminating single-use packaging. Packaging takes us to the next block, which is sustainable packaging. How do we have easy opening products and packaging that is designed for, limited or no adhesives, allows for high shelf life, etc. The third block is very much on innovative technologies, and Kristen already talked about some of the work that we've been doing in using drones to really track and see how plastic moves, because it gets generated on land, but very quickly gets into water systems, water bodies, and then flows down to further locations. So how do we use those supporting sort of eco feedback technology to understand consumer preferences and looking at hotspot cleanup examples? And the final block would be very much on innovative financing. And I just came out of a financing session where we're literally looking at how to bring together public sector finance and private sector finance. And there are new kinds of instruments that are being devised, innovative financing mechanisms from the public sector, such as blue bonds, from the private sector, such as blue loans, looking at models for public-private partnership, and really getting into this whole space of blended finance. Because when you're working at a city level or when you're working in a municipality, what they want to know is what is it that needs to be done? How can the private sector come in, but how can the public sector also put in place policies? I completely agree with one of the previous speakers who talked about, working very much at the local level and administrative level, municipality level, because really a lot can be done in these spaces. And often you find champions in local mayors, which really demonstrate a lot of the success stories, which can then be transmitted and scaled up to other cities and countries. What is really important is to have these kind of mechanisms, these regional platforms, and I'm hoping in the continued work that we will have with GPAP and Kristen's group is to really use the public-private platforms that they have created and combine it with some of the platforms that we are creating for innovations and investments, and find a new way to engage at a city level, at a municipality level, at a provincial level, and at a national level. Thank you.
Thanks, Anjali. We are just in time to take one or two audience questions. So if you have any questions, please point out to the speaker and make sure that it's a very brief and targeted question.
Thank you so much for such an incredible series of discussions and festival. I run a circular material startup, and we're setting up pilots in Bangladesh and India next year to recycle low-grade plastic waste into building materials. My question is specifically around end markets and a little bit more about the composition of the waste and what the real problem plastics are. We've spoken about multi-layer film, and that's 100% an easy answer. I'm really interested that might be shifting 2026 onwards, so I'll definitely be doing my homework around that. But when we try and ask recyclers in our target markets, Bangladesh and India, we get quite different answers sometimes, and it's very different from the UK's recycling market. So polypropylene often is a really surprising, it has a low end market. Some recyclers are saying it's a very easy material to recycle in the UK. LDPE, very low recycling rates in the UK, but people are telling us that that's no problem. If we have a good supply of it, we can recycle that locally too. So I just wanted to get the experience of panelists that might have a perspective on what the real like most priority plastics are that recycling investment is needed in. PET is one, has a ready end market, but what are the plastics which we need to be focusing on in this region? And does it apply across all countries in the region, or is there a really heterogeneous, does it differ country by country?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would ask the panelists who wants to come in for the answer to this question. What kind of plastic should be the priority focus with the Asia Pacific approach? Taylor?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to start off the conversation. I from my experience, I mean, one of the things that we do is, and especially what we did a lot in India and Bangladesh, was going sort of to the different layers within the informal waste sector. So especially at the sort of kabadiwala level or sort of the scrap shop level, and the values that we would get would vary hugely. And I know that that's not necessarily a helpful answer, but I think that the markets and the values that they get for different types of materials will be very different in different contexts. And one of the things also that I want to mention is that the value of the material is not necessarily just given on its recyclability. I mean, that's definitely a tremendous factor, but as was mentioned earlier, there's a lot of demand for different types of products upstream and different types of waste management downstream. And I think really the most important piece is making sure that all of those pieces connect. We've seen lots of cities, for example, that are very curious about, compostable products, but there might not be effective waste management at the end of cycle, for that to actually be handled. Consumers might not know how to dispose of them. There might not be a bin to put those in. So I think the value of the material at the end of its life is not necessarily just based on its recyclability. That's a tremendous factor, but I think it's also what is the material made of? How far? What is the footprint of it actually getting there? Do consumers know what to do with it? Is there infrastructure to handle it at the end of its life? And what does that look like? And what's the likelihood of that actually escaping that system? So I mean, we have found most often that multi-layer plastic films are one of the biggest problems. But as you said, that polymer, the value of that polymer can be very different in different places. So I wish I had a better sort of at the national level response, but I think there's definitely some good ways of collecting that data and answering those questions at the local level, and it might take some sort of creative problem solving.
Thanks, Taylor. We have Martin from Alliance to End Plastic Waste who also wants to answer to your question. Martin, over to you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, great question, which I'm living and breathing and wrestling with every day. So firstly, I would just make the comment, those design guidelines I talked about is adoption in Europe. So the sooner we can see them adopted elsewhere, so well and good. That is actually part of the answer to the question of how do we improve the value of some of these markets, or how do we address the complexity that there is in the downstream recycling. You quoted polypropylene, and the challenge with polypropylene is there are literally thousands of different grades of polypropylene which are used in many different applications, and those products are all very different. So if you try and recycle something which is not absolutely well sorted, you end up with a recycled product which really can't be used in any good application. It always ends up being significantly downcycled into garden furniture, into railway sleepers, paint pots and pails, because the quality of the material is just not good enough to be able to go back into a virgin application. On the other end of the scale, you have PET, and PET is always regarded as easily recycled. And the reason, firstly, is that it's easy to collect, it's easy to identify bottles, it's quite heavy. So it's efficient for the informal sector to be able to collect very high purity streams. But secondly, PET is a very simple polymer. There are only a few different grades of it. So I think the challenge here that I'm trying to illustrate, polyethylene somewhere in between, is it's around the complexity of the applications. And that's where I think the industry can work with design guidelines to look at reversing a little bit the trend of the last 20 years, where we've made plastics more and more sophisticated, really highly engineered products for specific applications, but regardless of the complexity that creates downstream. So we need to back up a little bit on that trend to try and design products where we have the post-use phase also in mind. Will it completely change that landscape? No, that's why we need some of the very advanced technologies as well. But I think that gives a little bit of an answer to the question. A lot of what is difficult depends upon the complexity of the applications and the polymer itself.
Thank you so much, Martin. We can take one more question.
All right, I'll try to be short. Hi,
Swati, I
guys.
want you to come in as well.
Okay, Anjali, please go ahead.
All right,
Okay,
thanks. I
so-
was using the raising the hand function. Okay, so on this question, it's really important, and for this purpose, we had conducted these market studies in 4 different countries in Asia Pacific. And what came out was, what does the private sector look at if indeed plastic is a resource and there's money to be made from this, right? Why is more private sector not coming in? And 2 of the top reasons was really looking at guarantee of feedstock and offtake markets, right? And that's what we're talking about. Now, amongst the different plastic types, as everybody said, PET is really the more established one. But what is really important that I think would be sort of a signaling device to the private sector is to really start to think through regional standards for recycled plastics, how much recycled plastic content should be there, because the last thing a CEO of a company wants is to have a product that will sell in one market but be banned in another market or not have met the necessary certifications or labeling standards. Similarly, for regional waste trade, let's not forget that Asia receives a lot of the regional waste from a lot of the developed countries of the world. And in sort of a response and building up to the legally binding instrument is really a lot of work that we are doing along with the Basel Convention, as well as with the UNODC, WCO, really to understand how do we inform the kinds of regional protocols that should be in place to make sure that when the plastic waste is coming in, it has the right kinds of compositions. You know, when you have post consumer plastic waste, you need to make sure is it how contaminated is it. So it's not just the plastic resin, it is the state of that plastic resin which also informs its recyclability. I think it's really important to understand also that the answer to this really varies quite a lot from country to country, from city to city, because some places have a lot of PET recycling, some places do not even have that much. So what are the kinds of solutions that you can think around this? Now, we have to talk about prices, right? At the end of the day, the price of recycled plastic is often higher than the price of virgin plastic. So how do we rebalance that? And what can we do collectively to send the signaling device to incorporate the costs of inaction if we don't move to recycled plastics? And you have more and more plastic piling up, and now there's more evidence coming out of the economic impacts on sectors, whether it's to do with tourism, it's to do with fishing, etc. So just wanted to bring that perspective. It's really important to work from both a public and private sector perspective.
Thanks, Anjali. We're just losing out on time, so maybe if you have more questions, maybe post the panel, we can take them separately. I would now ask Mr. Sanjay Kumar, who's the Additional Secretary from Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, to give his summing remarks for all the panelists that he heard.
At the outset, let me admit that it's great to be among panel of such great domain experts. It was really a learning curve listening to all of you. I would like to talk about the role of government, what it can do and what it should do. Because when I talk about government, it includes all the three layers: national, state, and local government. Because government has to do the tightrope walk of enabler as well as, I can say, regulator, both. So in that scenario, the job is to create an environment where all the stakeholders can collaborate and affordable and technically sound solutions emerge. Build the capacities of the local government. In Swachh Bharat Mission, what we have done that we have created really excellent online learning modules which are available in public domain. Anybody can go and go through that. You can take a self-evaluation test and you get a certificate also. And involve the community. That's a very important task. Involve the community for behavior change. And plus ensure that they participate in door-to-door collection and segregation at the source itself. The messaging and communicating with people is also extremely important. In this case, I will say that in India, the Swachh Bharat Mission has really succeeded in this particular task. And one component which it may be unfamiliar for the people who are listening from, who are not from India, one of the most toughest and important tasks make them feel that it's good to be a sanitation worker. It is dignified work. So I'm happy to say that we have done it substantially and done it really well. And as one of the speakers have pointed out that we need to build our capacities for recycling facility. So that we are doing since 2014, we have come a long way. And one more aspect is remediation of legacy dump sites. Because generally the garbage which has been lying dumped around across the country near various cities, the land is really valuable, and once we succeed in that, that land can be really put to extremely productive use. So I'm happy to say that Swachh Bharat Mission version 1 and version 2 both have got all these components. We have made substantial progress so far. Let me admit that we have a long way to go. But everybody, the people in the audience will agree with me that we are on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanjay, for summing that up. A last few points that I felt are a take back for all of us. One, of course, which one of our panelists highlighted, that we need to look at the transboundary nature of plastics, focus on upstream, midstream, and last downstream. Innovation is the key. Informal is very, very critical. And of course, across Asia Pacific cities, we can't really work without integrating the informal sector. Data is very, very critical. And of course, with all the studies that have happened across Asia Pacific, there is a bigger need to collaborate, share, and replicate this wealth of knowledge that has been generated. And clearly, building trust and partnerships is the need of the hour. So we really need to come out of the silos and work together as institutions, partners, stakeholders, and individuals. With this, I thank all the panelists who participated, the audience, and my colleagues, Mansi and Jogesh, who were there for all the back-end support. Thank you so much. Thanks.
I'm supposed to do it here or not?